Aloha, I'm Malia Zimmerman, and this is News Behind the News. Across the country, the battle is on for gun rights and gun control. And today we have one of the premier people involved in that battle, Alan Gottlieb from the Second Amendment Foundation and the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. I'd like to welcome him to the show.
Great to be back with you, Malia.
Thanks. You were on here before, and thanks for coming on again.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So you're here from Bellevue and visiting Hawaii?
Yeah, from Bellevue, visiting Hawaii. It's nice to get some sunshine and some nice warm weather. Back home right now, there's a big cold front going on, and so it's good to be here. And
also, you are a fan of Hawaii. You and your wife come frequently, and we appreciate your support of our tourism business and coming to Hawaii to enjoy our beauty as well. Because you live in a beautiful place.
We do, but we also come here a whole lot to defend gun rights as well, and to work with gun rights activists and organizations here in Hawaii.
Yes, okay. Well, talk about maybe the anniversary of the Newtown shooting and how that's impacted gun rights across the country, and then maybe we can go to state issues.
Well, you know, it's been a tough year for gun owners. We've been on the defensive since Newtown happened a year ago. And quite frankly, I've been involved in this gun rights struggle now since 1972, and I've never ever seen an attack on gun rights quite as strident and as repetitious as we've seen in the past year. You know, we've had everything thrown at us, you know, the kitchen sink plus, from the White House on down. I mean, the administration has done everything they could to pull out all the stops to get anything they could passed, no matter what it might be. And of course, as you're aware, and I'm sure most of your viewers are, Congress has passed really nothing that infringed on gun rights this year, despite this amazing attack that we've gone through. And I think the reason why nothing's really passed, quite frankly, is two things. One, on our side, gun owners really mobilized, they got active and got energetic and got very involved and engaged in the battle, and that helped a whole lot. The second thing was, I think Barack Obama and Vice President Biden and governors like New York, like Governor Cuomo, senators like Schumer from New York and Feinstein from California, made this issue very toxic. And by screaming for gun bans and magazine bans and limits on ammunition, I think what happened, it became so toxic that when they then went to their fallback position on, a so-called universal background check, that it fell by the wayside as well, because nobody trusted them anymore. Nobody believed where they were, what they were saying. They knew their agenda was far more severe than they were letting on. And I found it very interesting that they're screaming, what we need to do is pass this background check because of what's happened. Well, let's look what's happened. I mean, what happened in Newtown, the horrible incident, the guy that went and committed this horrific act, stole the gun from his mother. She went through a background check, so background check obviously wouldn't have stopped that situation. Or let's even look at a little earlier, the shooting at the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. The shooter went through background checks. Or let's take a look at what happened in Tucson, Arizona when Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot. The shooter went through background checks. So now you're screaming at the American people saying, if we only had a background check, we could have prevented this. Well, that's just not intellectually honest. And I think while Americans support background checks, and I support background checks as well, the problem is that they're trying to say that we need these because it would stop these incidents from happening is far from being candid or being truthful. And I think people see that, and they know even though they support background checks, they know they're not going to work, and they're not going to work for lots of reasons. The main reason is a really crazy person is going to find some way of committing a crazy act. Or violent criminals aren't going to obey a low gun control statute. They're going to find a way to get the gun anyway, because, I mean, if they're going to commit rape or robbery or murder, which is already, illegal in a criminal act, they're going to do it. And gun control in general doesn't work because, by nature, I mean, the problem is criminals break laws. And so passing one more law just isn't going to stop them from committing their acts. So I think the American people see this, and that's why we've now seen from a year ago to today, the push for gun control, the opinion polls are down, way down, below where they were a year ago, and in fact are probably more people supporting gun rights today than were over a year ago. So we've made up a lot of ground despite everything that's been thrown at us, which has just been unbelievable. And then on the state level, moving to the states, we did take some hits in some of the states, and it's interesting that the states we took the hits in are the so-called blue states that the Democrats control that already had, for the most part, very strict gun control. So adding more to it wasn't going to solve their problem, because giving you more poison for the, isn't the cure. If you're having a problem with strong gun control to begin with, I mean, passing another law isn't going to do it. And then we made a lot of gains in the so-called red states. And actually, I just tallied up the other day the wins and the losses, And we have more than twice as many wins in states where gun rights have been expanded rather than states where we have losses. But, you know, some of the losses were kind of bad. Like in New York, they limited the fact that you can only put 7 rounds of ammunition in your gun to protect yourself. So if 2, 3 gang members come to break in your house in the middle of the night, you're allowed 7 bullets, but they can have as many as they want because they're not going to abide by the law anyway. And we'll talk later in a few minutes about some of the court challenges. That's one of them. But New York was a really bad place where we lost some ground. We lost some ground in Maryland, in Connecticut, in California. But we gained ground in a lot of places as well, like Texas and Florida and Alabama and Louisiana. You know, we've really done pretty well. And that gets hidden a little bit behind the scenes because you don't hear about it. It's not the front page of the newspaper.
Right. So can you talk about, you founded Second Amendment Foundation?
Yes, I did.
And can you just give people an idea of why you did that, when you did that, and what the organization does?
Well, I got involved in the gun rights movement in 1972, going to work for the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, which is a nonprofit group, but its donations to it are not tax exempt because it gets involved in direct and grassroots lobbying. And there was no foundation to do, no 501c3 tax-exempt foundation to do education, research, legal defense in the gun rights movement at all. And so I founded the very first one that was there in that Second Amendment Foundation in 1974. We've grown a lot since 1974. One of the goals or one of the dreams was that we had a situation where, you know, you always wanted to have the Supreme Court get a case that would say you have an individual right to keep and bear arms. But there was, you know, it was like next to impossible because there was no case law in the lower courts that favored us. There was nothing in law review articles or in intellectual publications, you know, pushing the history of the Second Amendment, why it was, you know, adapted by the Founding Fathers. And so we started out, you know, publishing articles and getting research done, getting things in law review journals, holding legal scholars conferences, trying to build a foundation so that you one day could go to courts to win. And historically what happened is a couple of our first cases that we won weren't directly on Second Amendment grounds, but they're under state laws, under, you know, some cities were preempted from doing certain gun control things by statute or state law. And we just went to court to get some gun victories. And one of our famous ones was New Haven, Connecticut, which banned the sale of handguns. We overturned that in court. And San Francisco banned handguns in San Francisco twice, and we overturned that in court twice. And so we show that, you know, there was judges could rule on behalf of gun rights. And then we worked things up through the court system, and of course, you know, there was the famous, you know, Heller case, knocked out the Washington, D.C. gun ban, and the case the Second Amendment Foundation brought against Chicago, McDonald versus Chicago, that then through the 14th Amendment incorporated the Second Amendment rights to all 50 states so that states and cities couldn't take your rights away. Because basically, in the Bill of Rights, a lot of people don't realize this, but the way the Bill of Rights was initially written, the courts only applied it to the federal government. So you have to get each provision incorporated under the 14th Amendment to make it applicable to the states. And so it was new case law and very, very important because all the suits thereafter that had been being filed in the last few years all across the country could never have taken place if we didn't win the McDonald versus Chicago suit.
Maybe you can talk back up a little bit, talk about the Heller case a little more so people understand how important that was, and then how the McDonald case came off of that and what those two cases mean for gun owners in America. Okay.
Well, both in Washington, D.C. and in Chicago, they both had absolute bans on the ownership of handguns in your own home for self-defense.
So we're not talking about walking around the street, we're just talking about having a firearm in your home.
A functional firearm in your own home.
And some of these places are pretty dangerous.
Yeah, and in Washington, D.C., as an example, you couldn't have a rifle or shotgun that's functional either. It had to be taken apart. You couldn't even have it where you could use a rifle or shotgun in your home. So basically, there's a ban on all functional firearms in Washington, D.C. Now, the case Heller got brought in Washington, D.C. because, again, if you would have brought it in, if you would have done Chicago first, you could have said, well, gee whiz, it doesn't apply to the states, we're just going to throw it out of court. So applying in D.C., it's not a state, it's a federal enclave, and so hence it just involved the federal government, and you couldn't use that argument, you could attack the issue directly. And it took a lot of years for that case to work through the courts and up to the Supreme Court and to get a victory on that.
And then tell us who Mr. Heller was, and he was a security guard, right?
I believe Mr. Heller was a security guard. Mm-hmm. So he had a gun at work, but he couldn't have one in his home, which, I mean, if it's a person that you know has, you know, gone through background checks, it's a person that handles guns all the time and has them, but couldn't have one in his own home. And so that was a very important case. But probably just as important, or maybe even more important, was the McDonald case in Chicago, where Otis McDonald was a man who lived in a bad area of Chicago that tried very hard on his street to keep the druggies away and the gangs away, and got threatened a whole lot, had his home broken into, and couldn't protect himself and his family for trying to stand up for his community to fight crime, and then he was defenseless. And so we had a really good lead plaintiff in that case.
And he was I think he was a grandfather?
Oh, he's a grandfather. Yeah, he's a very, very nice, great.
I got to meet him at one of your conferences.
At one of our conferences.
Yep.
And that case was very important, not from a personal battle that he was having in his own community to be able to protect himself and his family, but for the whole nation. It wasn't just about Chicago, because when the Chicago gun ban got overturned, then what happened was that the ruling meant that nobody else anywhere around the country could take those rights away from you either. That subsequently opened up the floodgates for the Second Amendment Foundation to file scores and scores of suits. I think we're close right now. We have 20 to 30 active suits in federal court right now today.
Okay, another really important case you did that I actually think came to Hawaii and actually had an impact here was the one about when Louisiana got hit with the storm, Hurricane Katrina. And you filed a lawsuit there. Talk about that.
Well, a lot of us watched on TV, on CNN and other places where we watched police confiscating legally owned firearms from people. In one particular case was an older woman by herself who wanted to stay in her home after the hurricane, and the police knocked her down, physically assaulted her, and took her gun and left. And that was on CNN, and everybody could see that. We filed suit against New Orleans for the gun confiscation and got an immediate order against them from being able to confiscate any more firearms. And then over time with our lawsuit, we were able to enjoin them from ever doing it in the future and get those firearms returned to the rightful owners, which took a number of years, by the way, to get done because New Orleans wasn't cooperating. In fact, the city attorney of New Orleans got hit with a contempt from court fine for lying to the court about giving the guns back when they weren't given back. And so we really scored a very big victory there, and then that helped change some laws in some places. One, Louisiana passed the law not allowing New Orleans to ever do that as well, even though we had a court order against them. And then Congress passed the thing under under FEMA for emergency acts for disasters, that if you confiscated people's guns, you couldn't get your federal funding. But we have problems now around the states where there's some other states with those things. North Carolina had a similar law. We went to federal court after the McDonald case in North Carolina and knocked out the law as being unconstitutional under Second Amendment grounds, that you couldn't confiscate or infringe on people's firearms rights during times of emergencies, snowstorms, hurricanes, etc. But we have a lot of other states that have those things on the books still today. In fact, Washington State, where I live, has an emergency power statute that allows the governor or mayors to at times when they decide you shouldn't be able to own a gun to quote unquote stop the sales of guns or ammunition, or tell you you can't take your gun out of your home, or even confiscate your firearm. We have an initiative in Washington State, and coming up on the ballot, Initiative 591, that would not allow any government agency to confiscate anybody's firearms without the due process of law.
I think we had that pass here around the Hurricane Katrina
Yes.
time, where we had a law that prevented the government from doing that, confiscating firearms during a crisis.
Right, after Hurricane Katrina, Hawaii did pass that to stop that from happening. And we had a number of states that did pass laws as well, not just Hawaii, but other states went along with that. But there are still some states that haven't.
It's when you think about the government coming in, when in the situation in Louisiana, when people were so terrified, there was looting in the streets, people were dying everywhere and stealing, and it must have been so scary to have their firearms confiscated by law enforcement on top of it, when they couldn't even get law enforcement there to help them.
Right, and we had this juxtaposition on national television when Florida earlier had Hurricane Andrew. There were people outside their homes with so-called assault rifles protecting what was left after the hurricane of their property so that looters couldn't get it. And you saw that on TV, of people using the guns to protect themselves and their property. Then you had New Orleans on national television, the police knocking little old ladies down and taking their guns away from them. I mean, it was night and day. So
your lawsuit really did bring attention to that issue.
Yeah, it did, and we're still working on that issue because there are still states that had the laws on the books. Most of the states are arguing that we shouldn't win in court because we really haven't enforced that law. Just because it's on the books doesn't mean we're ever going to do it. Well, if that's the case, then get the law off the books.
Right. Now, what is the 20 and 30 cases that you're working on right now, the federal cases, what are those about in general, just overview? Are they all different or different issues?
They're all a little different. Some of them deal with, you know, some of the may issue versus shall issue laws, where some states like New York, New Jersey, Maryland, you know, et cetera, talk about how you have to show that you have a need to have that firearm, or that you're under a direct current threat to your life. You know, or you have to show good cause to be able to have the firearm for self-protection, rather than, you know, the shall issues where you meet a criteria, you go through the background check, and you have, you know, it's your right and you can have it. Some of them also deal, like in California, we have a case that deals, California has a law, as a handgun roster, and if a gun isn't on this approved roster, you can't buy it or or have it. And in California, it's like to keep the gun on the roster, the company who manufactures it has to pay an annual fee to the state every year. And it's hard to get a new gun that you come out with that might be a better firearm, a safer firearm, to be able to even get it onto the list now in California, so that newer technology guns that might be safer can't even be sold in the state of California. You know, and it's like, you know, there's no list of books in California you're allowed to read or have in your library, so there shouldn't be any list of which gun you can have and which gun you can't have. And so we're suing in California over that. We also have some suits around that deal with you know, buying guns across state lines. Right now, if you can't buy a handgun in the state you're not a resident of, even though you go through the same background check, you know, federally anyway. Since the background check system has changed over time, there's no governmental interest or reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. So we have cases of that nature as well. We also have a bunch of cases that deal with legitimate legal aliens who live here in the United States, where they either cannot own a firearm in their home state, or they can own a firearm but not allowed to get a permit to carry it like everybody else. And we've won a number of cases like that in Nebraska and New Mexico, states that tend to be supposedly gun-friendly, but they have these laws on the books. So every time we knock one of those laws down and extend Second Amendment rights, we help protect Second Amendment rights for everybody. And we've got a number of victories and a number more cases like that going on today.
And if people want to read, I know you've written a number of books over the years, but people can look on the website saf.org. Right.
At saf.org, one can find some of the links to the books, or the best place to buy them, because the cheapest prices one can get, quite frankly, is Amazon.com. So if people just go to Amazon and put my name in, Alan Gottlieb, the books will pop up.
Oh, okay. And also you have them at your conference, your annual conference.
Yeah, at our annual conferences, we tend to give out a lot of the books as reading materials and reference materials for the attendees.
And then you have some of the authors who have written some of the most well-known books in the country on Second Amendment issues there as well, sometimes speaking and also signing their books.
We tend to work with, you know, everybody in the gun rights movement, and try to be a clearinghouse so that everybody can participate through the foundation and get the information and work with us, and we work with them and help them with their educational and legal defense, you know, defense situations they have in their home states.
And so the foundation's a nonprofit, right?
The foundation is a nonprofit. Donations to it are tax deductible. We do nothing. We don't engage in anything politically. But speaking of politics, though, the midterm elections are going to be very, very important for gun rights and gun owners in this country. Particularly because, in all our legal cases, when you get to the legal side of this, which we just talked about, you know, it's judges. It's all about, you know, rule of law by judges, and sometimes it's ruled by man, not ruled by law. And unfortunately, Barack Obama is using gun rights or gun control as a litmus test for who he appoints versus judges. And I do not know of one judge that the president has appointed to any federal court, not just the U.S. Supreme Court, but the lowest federal courts as well, that supports gun rights. It's almost like that he will not nominate them if they don't quote unquote toe the mark for being you know, part of the prohibition lobby, so to speak. And the scary part about it is, as we're all just aware and read in the newspapers, this U.S. Senate did the so-called nuclear option, where now, you know, you only need 50 votes to confirm a judge to the bench, which is only going to embolden and empower Obama to appoint more crazy anti-gun extremists to the courts. And that could slam the courthouse door in the face of the whole gun rights movement. And so we're very concerned about it. And the only way to stop that is going to be the midterm elections coming up in 2014.
In terms of getting people elected who are Second Amendment, pro-Second Amendment.
The important thing is going to be now is control the United States Senate. If the United States Senate doesn't shift control, this rule, which is new, it's never been existed in the history of the country. You know, so there's no deliberations anymore. There's no way to slow down the process to find out, you know, where a person stands on an issue. It's going to be devastating. And as long as Harry Reid is the Senate Majority Leader, that rule is going to be in place. And so three seats have to swap over, so to speak, to change control of the Senate. So for gun owners, this could be the most important election we face in our history.
So President Obama's on his way to Hawaii soon, so you can wait around and talk to him directly. How's that?
Well, he doesn't want to talk to us. We offered, you know, after Newtown happened and the White House was trying to put its agenda together, what can we do to prevent these things, we offered to sit down and meet with them. They didn't want to meet with us. They only want to meet with the gun prohibition lobby. They don't want the input from our side at all. I mean, it's so polarized. They've made the issue so toxic that there's no way to even work together.
That's too bad. That's kind of summing up Washington, D.C. right now, right? And the Congress and so on.
Unfortunately, it is. And the trend line looks like it's going to get worse, not better.
So what's next for your organization in terms of lawsuits or in terms of focus?
Well, I promised our attorneys I don't talk about lawsuits that we're going to file until they're actually filed. So I really can't talk about what we're going to do with that. But we are going to continue to push very, very hard to make every may issue law a shall issue law across the country. I mean, it shouldn't be up to some bureaucrat to tell you if you have the right or the means to defend yourself. You should be able to have the right to do it. And if you can pass the background check, and there's no reason why, unless you're a disqualified person, you shouldn't be able to get that gun. It shouldn't be up to the whim of some local police chief or some local judge or somebody that just says, you know, you haven't shown me a sufficient need. You can't prove to me that when you walk out of your house today that you might become a victim.
So do you have to file something in every single state, or can you do federal?
Well, we tend to do our cases in federal court, but you're challenging a state law. And so while the state law is being challenged in federal court, one of our problems is we've got a lot of courts that are basically ignoring the Heller and McDonald decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court and thumbing their nose at the Supreme Court, usually the Obama judge appointees. And as you know, you don't get every case to the Supreme Court. It's not an automatic appeal you get, and they have a very full agenda, and it's hard to get your cases there. So you have to keep knocking on that courthouse door until they open it up.
Well, it's going to be interesting here because we do have a may issue law here, and really it's very restrictive in terms of who gets to have a firearm here to carry. No, it's basically nobody except some people in law enforcement.
Well, my argument is you don't really even have a may issue law because the way the law may be may issue, but the way it's being enforced is a no issue. And because it's a no issue, to me it's an absolute ban. And so those are the kind of cases that we're looking to push more because it's not just how the law is written, it's how the law is implemented. And you get anti-gun bureaucrats in government, and lo and behold, they implement it the way they want to, not the way the law is written.
Well, I've done a lot of stories on how people here, there's other ways to restrict firearms ownership, and one of them is just to make it so difficult and so bureaucratic that people don't have time to wait in 9 hours in line over 3 days. They, come one day, they start to line up at midnight, and they get their chairs out, and there's nowhere to park, there's nowhere to go to the bathroom. They're basically spending all night there. And then they wait to get in line to get the paperwork. They can't download the paperwork to fill out, and then they have to do all these things. And basically, it takes just to get a handgun here 3 days of waiting in line at the police station. There's only one place to go, and so they make it very difficult. And they could make it so much easier, or they could make other locations, but they don't want to do that.
Well, let me give you an example. I mean, in New York City, if you want to get a handgun to have just in your own home, not forget about the carry part of it, just to have it in your own home, there's only one place in all of New York City, which is rather large, where you can get that permit. And likewise, if you want a rifle or shotgun, there's only one place, but it's a different place. And they make it next to impossible to do it. And it's like a 9-month wait for them to approve it. I mean, you could be a victim a score of times in 9 months.
The other issue that we have here now is that there are not ranges on every island for people to practice at. There's one range here on Oahu, and just yesterday they closed part of it because it was, that's in Coco Head, and this I'm talking about on Oahu, because nearby residents are saying that bullets are going into their homes or their cars because the facility is so dilapidated that it needs to be fixed and it needs to be made more secure. And so that's the allegation is that somebody is shooting improperly and the bullets are getting into the neighborhoods. And so that part of the range, which is the only place on the whole island, if you're not a military person, that you can practice shooting a rifle. So now that's another restriction. Now these people who want to.
Well, we've seen that in lots of places. We have a suit right now in Chicago because with Chicago, we won the things that they couldn't ban your gun in your own home. They made as a requirement to have the gun in your home that you have to go to a gun range to prove that you're proficient with the gun, and then they went back and banned gun ranges. So there's no gun range in Chicago where you can do that to comply with the law. We won a suit over that, and so then they amended that law, but they amended it in a way that makes it next to, so now you can have gun ranges, but they make it a way that's impossible to build one, so you really can't have one anyway, and we're still suing over that as well. So that's another one of the suits in court. Because
they would want people to practice so that they aim straight.
Well, you know,
it's only common sense.
Yeah, well, they want gun safety, not gun control. Well, there's gun safety, but they oppose that. You know, and then you also have where they talk about we need licensing. Well, but will they give you a license to carry a firearm in Hawaii? No. So I mean, they're for licensing unless we can stop it. We're for gun safety unless we can stop it. The truth is, they really want to prohibit guns completely and take away your right completely. That's their end game, and we all know that. And so gun owners and people who care about freedom in the country need to understand that the end game is gun confiscation, gun prohibition. And the bottom line is that if you give them an inch, if you give them something, then once they get that, it only emboldens them, empowers them to come after everything else later on and go for their whole full agenda. And that's one of the reasons why gun owners have to try and all the time build these firewalls and stop them no matter what that's doing, even if it may sound like it might be legitimate or it might even be responsible. It's not, because it's not all they want. They want all your guns.
So what is it that drives you? You've worked on this issue for decades, and what is it that keeps you so focused and passionate about it in the last minute of the show that we have?
Well, I guess I'm an advocate for individual freedom in general. And one of the biggest things of individual freedom is the right to be able to have the means to protect yourself and defend yourself, defend your community or your country. And that's really probably what drives me with it.
Mm-hmm. And then, so what's next is the conference that people can attend?
Well, our next Gun Rights Policy Conference, again, is in Chicago, the last full weekend of September of 2014. And it's a great conference. If you want to get involved in the issue, it's a great place to start, even if you're just a novice.
And if you know nothing about Second Amendment rights at all, or the issue, what books would you suggest people read, or what websites would they go to?
Well, the best place to start is to go to the Second Amendment Foundation's website at saf.org, or just put Second Amendment Foundation in your browser, and we're going to pop up. And from there, it's a wealth of information.
And it's showing up on the screen right now, the website.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you've written books, and they can look on Amazon for that. Yeah,
just you Google me, or just go to Amazon.com, and if you put just gun books in Amazon, mine will pop up.
And I know you don't want to play favorites because there's so many good authors out there, but John Lott he's been on this show.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, and John Lott, of course, has spoken at a number of our conferences.
Yes, and I think you have some people from Reason Foundation that have also written books and spoken. So anyway, well, thank you for coming on the show today. I appreciate you coming here and taking time out on your vacation in Hawaii, and we look forward to you getting involved in our issues here, and maybe someday your lawsuits that Target shall or may issue will impact us here in Hawaii, and we'll see.
Yes, some of them may from California may impact Hawaii.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been News Behind the News. Aloha.